In Season 6 of Game of Thrones, and hopefully soon in the books, Daenerys Targaryen sails west, hoping to take the throne of Westeros. She brings with her an army and a navy and 3 dragons, but her war won't be easy. If Dany's to succeed in her conquest, she should take some lessons from Game of Thrones history, because this is actually the second time a Targaryen has invaded Westeros from the east with 3 dragons. The first time was 300 years ago, in the conquest of Aegon Targaryen. So, before Tommen and Joffrey and Robert Baratheon, the king of Westeros was Aerys Targaryen, the father of Daenerys and Viserys. Before Aerys was a dozen generations of Targaryen kings, a dynasty of 3 centuries, which was founded by Aegon Targaryen. Aegon's family originally came from Valyria, the empire of the Dragon Lords, but it blew up, which is kind of its own story. The Targaryens escaped this doom and settled on Dragonstone, an island just off Westeros, and for generations they stayed there, trading in the Narrow Sea and meddling in eastern politics, but when Aegon became Lord of Dragonstone, his interest was Westeros. Westeros at the time was divided into 7 kingdoms. The north was ruled by King Torrhen Stark, the Vale by Queen Regent Shara Arryn for a young son Ronel, the Iron Islands and the Riverlands ruled by King Harrenhal, the Westerlands ruled by King Loren Lannister, the Reach by King Mern Gardener, the Stormlands by King Argilac Durrandon, and Dorne by Princess Meria Martell. These kingdoms had been fighting one another for centuries, but the way Aegon saw it, Westeros was one realm, for one king to rule alone. He was to be that king, so he planned an invasion. We don't know much about Aegon as a person. He was a great warrior and leader, but he was also an enigma, reserved, with few friends. His closest companions were his sisters, who were also his wives, because the Targaryens really love incest, Visenya and Rhaenys. Visenya was a skilled warrior, stern and serious, while Rhaenys was more playful and impulsive, a lover of music and dancing. There was also Orys Baratheon, Aegon's friend and possibly his bastard half-brother. The Targaryens had alliances with houses Bar Emmon, Celtigar, Massey, and Valyrion, all minor houses that were based nearby to Dragonstone. And the Targaryens also had dragons. Visenya rode a dragon called Vhagar, Rhaenys rode a dragon called Meraxes, and Aegon rode a monster called Balerion, the Black Dread, a dragon so huge that whole towns were swallowed up in the shadow of his wings when he passed over them. After the destruction of Valyria, these 3 were the only dragons known to exist in the world. So that was Team Targaryen at the beginning of the conquest. Aegon, his sisters, and their 3 dragons, Orys Baratheon, the Bar Emmons, Celtigars, Masseys, and Valerions. They raised a small army and landed on Westeros. At the place where they landed, the mouth of the Blackwater River, Aegon built a small fort, the Aegon Fort. Rhaenys and Visenya went and took over the nearby small castles of Stokeworth and Rosby, which was pretty easy because they had dragons. The lords of Duskendale and Maidenpool gathered an army and marched on Aegon with 3,000 men, but Aegon easily destroyed them with his dragon. If you pay close attention, you might start to see a pattern here. Then back at the Aegon Fort, they had a ceremony, where Aegon let his defeated enemies keep their old lands and positions, so long as they joined his side. Visenya crowned Aegon, Rhaenys named him King of Westeros, and they unfurled a Targaryen banner, a red 3-headed dragon, on black silk. The Targaryens and their Valyrian ancestors didn't have a tradition of heraldry, but Aegon used this Westerosi custom as a way of showing he was one of them. When the lords saw Aegon's banner, they took it as a sign that he was a worthy High King for Westeros, but there was still some conquering left to do. One of Aegon's first moves was to send a fleet of ships led by Daemon Valerion to attack Gulltown and the Vale of Arryn. The Arryns got a fleet together and managed to beat the Targaryens, sinking a third of their ships and killing Daemon Valerion, but in response, Visenya came and burned the Vale's fleet with her dragon Vhagar. This kinda sets the tone for the rest of the conquest. Sometimes the Targaryens did get beat, but never for long, because in the end, Aegon's enemies had no answer for his dragons. Well, except for Dorne, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Aegon marched on to his first real challenge, King Harrenhal. House Hall was originally from the Iron Islands, but they came to rule the Riverlands as well. Harren was called the Black, and was legendary for his cruelty. He built a tremendous castle called Harrenhal and made the Riverlanders pay for it, plundering from the local lords and working thousands of people to death. As Aegon approached Harrenhal with his army, he was attacked by Harren's men twice. In the second battle, 2 of Harren's sons managed to sneak up and kill a bunch of Aegon's men in the night, but in the morning, Aegon burned Harren's sons with his dragon as they tried to escape across a lake. Harren tried to rally the Riverlords to help him fight, but instead they rose up against him under the leadership of a Lord Edmund Tully. Suddenly outnumbered, Harren retreated to his castle. When Aegon came, he offered Harren peace, said if he gave up, he'd let him go home to the Iron Islands. He said he had 8,000 men outside Harren's walls. Harren said what's outside of his walls is of no concern, because his walls are strong and thick. Aegon said, but I have dragons. Dragons fly. Harren said, stone doesn't burn. So Aegon said, when the sun sets, your line shall end. When night fell, Aegon descended on Harrenhal with his dragon, bathing its towers in fire until they began to melt like candles. Everything inside was caught on fire. Wood and wool, hemp and straw, and all of Harren's men. The greatest castle in Westeros was made a ruin that night, and Harren died, along with his entire line. In the morning, the Riverlords pledged their allegiance to Aegon, and Edmund Tully was named Lord Paramount of the Trident, the ancestor of Hoster, Brynden, Catelyn, Lysa, and Edmure. As for Harrenhal, its twisted, melted ruins are now believed to be cursed. Almost every character who holds Harrenhal in the main story has ended up violently murdered. Littlefinger and Roose Bolton in the books are 2 of the only ones to survive, so far. But yeah, Aegon defeated Harrenhal and took the Riverlands. The Iron Islands Aegon kind of ignored for a few years, but later he came back and sorted them out and allowed them to pick their own leader. They chose Vicon Greyjoy, ancestor of Balon, Euron, Aeron, Asher, or Yara, and Theon. While Aegon took the Riverlands, Rhaenys and Orys went to take the Stormlands. On their way to the castle of Storm's End, they were ambushed by Argilax's men, who killed 1,000 Targaryen soldiers before melting back into the forests. So Rhaenys burned the forests, killed the men, and kept on marching. By now, King Argilax had heard what had happened to Harren, so he decided to leave his castle and attack the Targaryens in the field. From Dragonback, Rhaenys saw them coming, so she and Orys and the Targaryen army dug in and waited for them to come. Right on cue, a huge dramatic storm began. A steady rain became a howling gale, setting the stage for a massive battle, later called the Last Storm. Because of the storm, Rhaenys' dragon Meraxes couldn't fly, so the battle was actually a pretty fair fight. It raged well into the night, with Argilax charging the Targaryens with cavalry and spearmen until he finally broke through to his enemy's center and was faced with Rhaenys and Meraxes. The dragon burned Argilax's best men and scattered his cavalry, and Argilax was killed in single combat with Orys Baratheon. The battle ended, and after a brief resistance by Argilax's daughter, Argella, the Stormlands were won for Aegon. Orys married Argella and took the Durrandon castle, sigil, and house words for his own, and so the house Baratheon was founded, ancestors of Robert, Stannis, Renly, and, don't forget, Robert's bastard, Gendry. On the other side of Westeros, the kings of the Westerlands and the Reach, Loren Lannister and Mern Gardener, decided that enough was enough. They raised the biggest army ever seen in Westeros, over 50,000 strong, and marched on the Targaryens. Aegon, with his much smaller army, came to meet them, and they clashed in a field of wheat and grass, which Aegon noted was very dry. It hadn't rained in a while. The battle began, blokes started killing blokes, but then the Targaryens activated their trap card, which was, it was their dragons. Rhaenys and Visenya started big fires to the sides and behind of the enemy, trapping them, while Balerion filled the enemy lines with flame and smoke. Thousands of men were burned alive in what was later called the Field of Fire. King Loren Lannister managed to escape. He surrendered to Aegon and was made Warden of the West, ancestor to Tywin, Tyrion, Cersei, and Jaime. But King Mern and his family were all wiped out, ending House Gardener, who had ruled the Reach for thousands of years. Control of the Reach then fell to Harlan of House Tyrell, who had served the Gardeners as stewards for many years. Harlan immediately surrendered to Aegon, and so was given dominion over the Reach as Aegon's Warden of the South. Interestingly, it's implied, at least in the Blu-ray features for the show, that it was the Tyrells' idea for the Gardeners to go get themselves killed so that the Tyrells could take over. These schemers are the ancestors of Margaery, Mace, and Loras. After the Reach and Westerlands were conquered, Aegon heard the Northmen were on the march, so he rushed up with all his army to meet King Torrhen Stark. Torrhen had a pretty big army, with 30,000 Northmen, but he saw that Aegon's was bigger, a huge host of Riverlanders, Stormlanders, Westerlanders, Reachmen, everyone he had conquered and won over to his side. Torrhen saw Aegon's dragons and heard how they'd burned thousands on the Field of Fire and at Harrenhal, and Torrhen thought, do we really want to fight these guys? Some of his bannermen wanted to attack, others wanted to fall back to moat Kaelin. Torrhen's bastard brother Brandon Snow offered to sneak into Aegon's camp and try to kill his dragons. But in the end, Torrhen decided to make peace. He knelt, gave up his crown, and swore the North to Aegon. Forever after, Torrhen was known as the King Who Knelt, and his Stark descendants were no longer Kings of Winter, but only Wardens of the North. Some Northmen were angry that their king would surrender, but it's hard to deny Torrhen saved the North from a war they probably wouldn't have won. Still, this Brandon Snow thing is interesting. Torrhen's brother offered to cross the Trident alone under cover of darkness to slay Aegon's dragons while they slept. Was this guy brave or stupid? Did he have a plan to kill these dragons? There is a bit in Dance that could give a hint of what Brandon was thinking. Bran Stark has a vision of the distant past where he sees a pale, fierce youth in the Winterfell Godswood slicing 3 branches of weirwood off the heart tree and shaping them into arrows. Some fans believe that that youth is Brandon Snow and speculate that these 3 weirwood arrows could have had some power to kill Aegon's 3 dragons. Weirwood is linked to the magic of the old gods and the children of the forest, so there isn't much to go on here, but it is an interesting possibility. Maybe dragon-killing weirwood arrows will come back into the story at some point. In the Vale, Queen Regent Shara Arryn had just seen 5 of Westeros' 7 kingdoms fall to Aegon, so she raised her defences. She put a strong army at the Bloody Gate and garrisons all up the Eyrie, the reputedly impregnable castle of the Arryn Kings, but all her defences turned out to be useless when Visenya flew over them on Dragonback, easily landing in the Eyrie's inner courtyard. When Queen Shara ran out to face her with her guards, she found her son Ronald sitting on Visenya's knee, asking for a ride on the dragon. In the end, Shara and Visenya had a nice chat. Ronald got a ride on the dragon, and when he landed, he was no longer a little king, but a little lord. The Vale yielded to Aegon and joined his realm. After the Vale, there was one kingdom left to conquer. Rhaenys mounted her dragon Meraxes and flew out to the sands of Dawn. She came to the castle of Vaith and flew down to take it, but it was empty. None of the lords or guards were there, and the peasants wouldn't say where they went. So Rhaenys flew on to Godsgrace, then Planky Town, but could find only women and children. Finally, she came to Sunspear, home of the Martell Princes of Dawn, and found it too abandoned, except for the Princess of Dawn herself, Meria Martell. Meria was old and fat and blind. Some called her the Yellow Toad of Dawn, but she was still very sharp. Meria told Rhaenys that she wouldn't fight, but she wouldn't kneel, that the Martell House words are unbowed, unbent, unbroken. She said that Dawn has no king, that Rhaenys isn't wanted in Dawn, and to return at her peril. So Rhaenys left, and Dawn remained unconquered. Rhaenys did come back in another Targaryen attack 10 years later, and when she did, Rhaenys was killed. A scorpion bolt pierced Meraxes' eye, and the dragon and the queen fell from the sky. Every time the Targaryens tried to take Dawn, Dawn beat them by using these guerrilla tactics. Whenever the dragons came, the Dornish wouldn't line up to be roasted like at the Field of Fire. They would instead vanish, melt away, leaving only stone and sand for them to burn, emerging when it was safe to kill their enemies from the shadows. It wasn't until over 100 years later that Dawn finally joined the Seven Kingdoms, and even then, it wasn't by conquest but by diplomacy and marriage. Dawn joined Westeros on their own terms, an attitude upheld by some of Meria's descendants, including Oberyn, Doran, Elia, and Trystane. So, Aegon failed to conquer Dawn, but 6 out of 7 kingdoms ain't bad. He came to Oldtown, the biggest city in Westeros, and the center of the Faith of the Seven, which is like the Catholic Church of Game of Thrones. The High Septon, kind of the Pope, had spent 7 days and 7 nights praying to the gods for advice on Aegon, and eventually he decided that he would not fight the guy with the dragons who had just conquered most of the country, but would declare him the rightful ruler. So the Septon anointed Aegon with 7 oils, placed a crown upon his head, and proclaimed him Aegon of House Targaryen, the first of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lord of the 7 Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm. Aegon decided to rule his great new realm from the new town that was growing around the Aegon fort, which eventually would become the city of King's Landing. Aegon made a throne out of the swords of his defeated enemies, the Iron Throne, which looks a lot cooler in the books. So that is how Aegon conquered Westeros. What can Daenerys learn from this? The first most obvious lesson is that her most valuable assets are her dragons. She can use them to destroy enemy castles and armies and fleets, to control battlefields, to scout ahead, to intimidate. They'll probably be very useful against the White Walkers, but Daenerys will have to be careful to protect her dragons. They can be killed. As Rhaenys learned in Dawn, a scorpion bolt can kill one, and historically they've also been killed by arrows, even by mobs of angry peasants if they get trapped indoors. There might also be the risk of somehow losing control over one of her dragons. In the books, Euron Greyjoy has a magic horn that he claims can bind dragons to his will. There's also speculation that Bran or the Night King could do some skin-changing magic shenanigans to take one of Dany's dragons, just like Bran wargs Hodor, and the Walkers control Whites. Basically, there are a lot of things that could go wrong with the dragons, and honestly, Dany will probably lose at least one of them somehow. The story would be boring if you just easily won with them, right? Also, Dany should watch out for guerrilla tactics, like the Targaryens faced in Dawn. She's already come up against this sort of thing with the Sons of the Harpy in Meereen, who hide in the day and strike at night, and Dany wasn't much good at dealing with these guys. The basic problem is that dragons are great at killing your enemies, but only if you know who your enemies are and where they are, and sadly, in the Game of Thrones, things aren't always so straightforward. Something else Dany might want to think about is political and cultural legitimacy. Aegon was really smart in using symbols and traditions that showed he'd be a worthy ruler, that he would rule not as some Valyrian foreign overlord, but as a Westerosi king. He used Westerosi heraldry, he was anointed by the leader of Westerosi religion, and he built a huge, visible, tangible symbol of his political power in the Iron Throne, using the actual swords of his enemies to embody his right of conquest. All these things contributed to Aegon's legitimacy in the eyes of the people he ruled, to make him the sort of leader that people were happy to follow. Dany should consider this stuff too. She has spent almost all her life far from Westeros, and she leads a mostly foreign army, so there's a risk that people will see her not as a rightful queen, but as a foreign conqueror. One easy way to improve this is to remind everyone, as she already often does, that she is the blood of Valyria, a descendant of Aegon, and the inheritor of his dynasty. She might not want to remind everyone, however, that her father was the notoriously cruel and crazy Mad King who Robert fought a rebellion to usurp, so she might want to be sensitive there. Another interesting issue for Dany is religion. Dany seems to have no interest in the faith of the Seven, and besides, the High Septon just got blown up in the show, so the faith's probably in disarray anyway, but Dany is making connections to the Red God, the Lord of Light. She's rubbing shoulders with Red priests who claim she's Azor Ahai. This might help get her support in Essos, but most Westerosi don't follow the Red God, so this could actually work against her here. She'll want to be careful with this. Finally, part of what made Aegon so successful was that he didn't just destroy all his enemies with dragonfire. He always offered mercy. So long as his foes bent the knee, he'd even let them keep their lands and titles. Aegon turned his enemies into allies. Robert Baratheon did the same thing. But will Daenerys be so merciful? She's been pretty burny lately, more fire and blood than peace and diplomacy. In the show, she talks about breaking the wheel, destroying the great houses of Westeros, rather than winning them over to her side. Aegon the Conqueror brought fire and blood to Westeros, but afterwards he gave them peace, prosperity, and justice. Will Dany do the same, or will she bring only death and ruin? We'll have to wait and see. Thanks for watching. A lot of these beautiful illustrations, and most of the information, are from The World of Ice and Fire, George R. R. Martin's book about the history and cultures and locations of the world of Game of Thrones. If you'd like to check out the book, there's a link to buy it below, which helps support this channel at no extra cost to you. Thanks also to Something Like a Lawyer and Bryndon Beefish of Wars and Politics of Ice and Fire for helping out with this video script. You can find some amazing in-depth Game of Thrones analysis at their blog. There's a link below. Thanks also to the patrons supporting this channel on Patreon, including Bath Tarth, Psychotic Oyster, Erica Campbell, Anna Jarzab, Cam Lewis, Mama QB, Scott Dediman, Bruno Johnson, For the Watch, and Ricky. Cheers.